All right, welcome to Halitics. So glad to be with you this Thursday, and I'm super excited to welcome Peter B. Collins to Halitics. Hey, Peter, how you doing today?
Well, I'm doing okay. My voice is a little bit ragged. I've got a sinus infection, but how I'm glad to be here and happy Juneteenth.
Yeah, happy Juneteenth. I was going to center that for the moment. We should certainly recognize one of the terrible atrocities that this country is responsible for, or at least the people who began the country before it was even a country and going into the first 80 years or so, or 85, I don't know, whatever it was, 4 score and 7 years. Yeah. And let me ask you, Peter, because you and I have I think, very similar politics. Why is it important, in your opinion? And I think it is, but I want to get your take on why it's important that we remember the sins of the past.
Well, it's interesting. I was just reading an item in the San Francisco Chronicle half an hour ago related to the site of the Japanese internment camp in Manzanar. And I've actually visited there. And the Department of Interior has now posted signs inviting people to complain if they are uncomfortable, if they see any information that's posted there that is critical of people who are currently living or people in the past. And it's really an affront to our history and to our efforts to learn from crucial mistakes. And the same is going on as we try to erase the history of slavery, the history of Jim Crow, the idea that DEI, while the way it's implemented may create some bureaucratic issues, that there's something fundamentally wrong with recognizing the history of racism and that it continues to this day. And the idea that we can whitewash it, that we can sanitize it, and that we have to make everything safe for people who want to live in denial is just so deeply offensive and obscene. And let me open up something because I listened to, watched your Halitics episode, not all of it, but a good bit of it from yesterday. And I heard a passing reference that you made where you linked identity politics with wokeness. And like you, I don't support identity politics. I don't believe that we should simply promote or support someone because of elements of their identity. And that, this has caused a lot of problems for the Democratic Party. But I am offended at the way Trump successfully redefined the term woke, and that so many people have embraced his um, uh, dystopian definition of what woke means. And in simple terms, to me, woke is that you're aware of the disparities in treatment under the criminal justice system, and that outcomes are very different for people who aren't white like me and who don't have the resources to hire a good lawyer if I am, accused of some crime or other misdeed. So I wanted to ask you to explain to me how you view woke and if you believe it's become some sort of a liability to the American left.
Well, I think woke, when I use the term, and I'm definitely more critical of the idea of wokeism than you. I think you and I, we see it the same way with the identity politics. But to me, the problem I have with wokeism, and I think this predates Trump and MAGA, is the idea that if something happens to you that you don't like, if you are scolded, if you if an outcome doesn't doesn't agree with you, then you attribute it to something other than your own mistake, your own failure, the fact that someone else might be better than you. And I think that's what I would call wokeism. That's where I would call it wokeism. And I don't agree with that. I didn't get into college because uh, whatever color of my skin. I don't agree with that. I think people need to be responsible for what happens to them. Now, certainly there are many bad outcomes that are unfair, unjust, but that's sort of where I have a problem with wokeism, is that people say if I don't get something that I want, it's because of my identity. It's not because of the way I acted or what I did.
All right. Well, let me start off with a little disagreement here, because I think that fuels the extreme definition of wokeism that Trump employs, and that fuels a great divide in this country that does lead white people to broadly dismiss and denigrate the true disparities that do occur. And there are injustices that occur because of color. And we know that there is racial profiling in police stops. And that is the front end of the pipeline to the criminal justice system. And so I think that by using that term, we are either intentionally or unintentionally fueling the ignorance that is driving so much of the redefinition of fairness and opportunity in American society.
So I am happy to have this conversation. I wasn't planning to have it, but I think it's important to have one. And I will do this. And I've had this with other folks as well. I would say, Peter B., that for me, the biggest driver of the increasing tensions that we see in society, the anger, the resentment, to me, by far the biggest driver, and the one we must address, is simply inequality. Intra-racial inequality, interracial inequality, intra-religious inequality, inter-religious inequality. To me, the way you reduce tensions between groups of people and between individuals is you reduce their life circumstances, the quality of their life. So I think we'd have far less anger, we'd have less resentment, we'd have less racism if we did tax the billionaires out of existence, if we guaranteed every single American a safe, secure home, or at least a place to sleep every night, enough food to eat, health care, good education. I think if we did those things, the tensions that I think cause many folks to attribute bad outcomes either to their identity or to affirmative action or some other type of wokeism, as the right would call it, that would go away to a very significant degree.
Well, I have no disagreement with you about the fundamental that economic inequality, the gap in terms of wealth and income, the oligarchic control of our government, these do drive divisions, but I think they are real. And it's not just something that is apparent. And certainly there are people who exaggerate. There are people who will blame their own personal failures on a larger argument. But, I think we have to acknowledge that there is racism and that there are people who are victims of various systems, whether it's in terms of access to jobs, access to housing, access to health care, and that the that this is getting worse and not better, and it is weaponized by the right, by the white, and by the wealthy. And that, I don't support um, anything that will either give comfort to or enable those forces.
I agree with you that things are getting worse. There's no question about it. But I think the reason things are getting worse is because we have much lower top marginal tax rates than we did in the 50s and 60s. I think things got better from the 30s to the 60s in terms of race relations because we had a 90+% top marginal tax rate, at least until JFK reduced it. I think things got better during that period because the government was uh, fundamentally focused on rising the floor rather than ending the ceiling completely. So I guess I don't disagree with you that there are terribly unfair outcomes in our society. And I do think that racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia all are real and that they impact on people's lives. But I don't know what better way to address those besides, first of all, again, greatly reducing wealth and income equality, period. So everyone has enough and no one has too much. And at the same time, yes, when there are claims that, racism or prejudice or some type of unfair practice led to an unjust outcome, sure, we should investigate that, absolutely, and redress it.
Well, and I'll just add that I think the legal system is an essential tool to addressing the inequities and trying to, shift so that we don't continue the embedded patterns that we started talking about Juneteenth. A lot of this does come from the virulent and unaddressed racism in American society and culture. And so it's a peeve of mine. Bill Maher on HBO has really moved so far to the right in the last couple of years. And to me, he is, he used to call his show politically incorrect, and now he considers himself the arbiter of what is politically correct for what he considers to be mainstream Democrats. And he no longer allows people on his show, or at least he doesn't invite people on who challenge the arguments that I'm making here regarding what is woke and what is bad about woke. And we see in the extreme dismantling of DEI programs that, as I alluded to earlier, can get bogged down in bureaucracy and also can invite preachy and judgmental approaches to making people stay after class to sit through a seminar and have somebody who they don't like or who represents a kind of victimization, tell them how to think and how to behave. But I think that these are necessary ways of trying to address the broad inequalities, for example, in corporate America. And, the fact that women, still don't enjoy leadership positions in the numbers that men do. And it ripples out from there into, race and gender and sexual identity issues. And I don't think it fixes everything, but I think it's a good faith effort to address these problems. And all of this is being dismantled even to the ridiculous, decision by Pete Hegseth to strip the name Harvey Milk from a Navy ship. And some Doge kid apparently saw Enola Gay in reference to the aircraft that was used to deliver the nuclear bomb to Japan as something that had to go because it was gay. And so, we have reached an incredible extreme swing of the pendulum. And I feel that some of it is encouraged by people who present themselves as progressive and, balanced. So that's just my argument.
No, I really appreciate it. I'm going to think long and hard. If you say something, Peter B, I think about it. I may or may not agree in the end, but I take it seriously. And I'm going to present in a moment a headline that I think responds in part to why I have a somewhat different take. I do want to urge folks, please do subscribe to Halitics. If you haven't yet done so, we greatly would appreciate that. Get the word out. Click like if you do like it. We hope you will. And even if you don't, click like anyway. It's very easy. It's free. Doesn't cost you nothing. Costs you nothing. And I won't put up, Peter B, I won't subject you to my Facebook GIF, the Halitics GIF, but we'll maybe get that later on in the program. So let me just put something on screen real quick that I think this headline may be the personal reason why I, to a degree, have a problem with folks who claim the victim mantle or blame identity or some other fact or some kind of ism. So here's the New York Times claiming that anti-Semitism is an urgent problem. Now, I read their article and I had this op-ed, and it's of a piece with many others. The ADL has made this claim repeatedly that I'm Jewish, so I feel very comfortable making this point. I don't see Jews as victims in America. I see Jews right now as victimizers. We are victimizing the Palestinian people. We, not me, but, and it is wrong to say all Jews, but certainly the Jewish state with the Jewish star in the middle of its flag is committing a genocide. It is a Nazi state. And they are weaponizing these allegations that people dislike them or want to kill them because they're Jews. Well, they want to kill them. They're victims if they are. There certainly would be targets if their victims had the bombs and the guns and the planes that they have and the missiles that they have, because they're killing these poor people in the Middle East. So to me, it's very easy. It's gratifying to take an example of one thing that happened and say, this is hate against me, rather than questioning whether there's any legitimacy to the claim. Now, that said, yes, I look at outcomes. And I'm Jewish. Jews are rich. Jews have power. Jews have influence. I get it that other groups in this country don't. And those people should. And you mentioned women, talk about Black people on Juneteenth. Again, to me, the way you redress that is you say, okay, well, we're going to make sure you have enough. The problem that you face in our society is you don't have economic power. Well, we're going to make sure you do. And we're going to make sure that other groups don't have an inordinate amount of economic power. After we do that, after we rebalance the scales in a way that makes things much fairer, then we can start talking about how to go even beyond that.
Well, Hal, here we are in violent agreement. And I, as a lapsed Catholic, so I'm a Christian, not a Jew, I've always been extremely careful in my criticism of the policies of the State of Israel and separating that from anything that could be construed as a broad swipe at people who are Jewish. And like you, I am deeply offended at the trivialization, at the casual use of anti-Semitism as a way to repel a principled criticism of the genocide, of the extreme Netanyahu government, and the Americans who happen to be Jewish who fall in line behind it and who use outsized power that they enjoy, outsized influence, whether it's economic or political or legal, to silence the individuals of any stripe who speak up against the violence and the ethnic cleansing and the brutality that we are witnesses to on a daily basis. And let me note that I believe it's something like the mission statement of the Likud party uses the phrase that Israel has the biblical right, the legacy, to rule from the sea to the river. And when that phrase is flipped by people who support the rights of the Palestinians, and there is a chant that says, Palestine shall be free from the river to the sea, that is anti-Semitic. And that we end up in a war of rhetoric and the most extreme interpretation of tropes. And we're seeing it today in the rationalization for the U.S. entry, which is almost a foregone conclusion, into Israel's provocative attacks on Iran. And that because people in Iran chant death to America, death to Israel, and use phrases that are translated into the extreme trope that they want to wipe Israel off the map. And therefore, this is the basis for this tribal, primitive approach to what should be rational thinking, and becomes a substitute for any kind of honest dialogue about these matters. And fundamentally, we know, and Gareth Porter is a journalist who started writing against war during the Vietnam era. And in about 2007, he published a book where he was the first to show that Ayatollah Khamenei had issued a fatwa, a decree, that Iran shall not develop a nuclear weapon. And to its credit, CNN, which is so pro-Israel in its coverage that it's despicable, in recent days, perhaps just because their goal is to generate conflict and to try to push Trump into a corner, but they've been using the statement that Tulsi Gabbard, who's a problematic figure, uttered in one of her appearances before Congress back in March. And she flatly said that the intelligence community assesses that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program and has not since 2003. And people overlooked that in his exit interview in January of this year, Biden's CIA director, Bill Burns, told NPR the same damn thing. And so the propaganda that Israel wields so effectively, and that is embraced by American politicians of both parties, with only a handful of exceptions, and it is now being used by Trump to claim that, they were on a fast track to develop a nuclear weapon. Well, because of the attack a week ago Friday by Israel on Iran, Iran exited the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which the nuclear power called Israel does not sign on to. And if they're not racing to develop a nuclear weapon underground at Fordo, then they're not really dedicated to protecting their sovereignty. And so I know I went pretty far from your original comment here, but this is all part of a piece. And we have lost our First Amendment rights. And when the Biden crackdown on campus protests, we got to give credit or assign blame, more accurately, that's where this began. And Trump has used it to, cut the balls off of Columbia University, his attacks on Harvard, and they don't stop there. He uses anti-Semitism everywhere to claim that we need to cut cancer research and that we need to defund anything that happens in California because it's a dangerous, radical, liberal,
Which, by the way, couldn't be farther from the truth in so many different ways. I just jumped in real quick, Peter, because first of all, no, I'm glad you went off and kind of, I wouldn't say it wasn't even that much of a tangent. It was a bit of a digression, shall we say. Israel, I did a program, I guess it was earlier this week, will they destroy us all? It's very possible. And just real quick, I always do center the real victims of empire. Right now, those are the Gazans. They lost another 69 people yesterday, according to the health ministry there, and we're up to over 55,700 Gazans killed. And that's just the known. Those are just the bodies that have been recovered and that are attributed to the Israeli military action. Obviously, the real number is much, much higher. Over 50% are women and children. And Trump and Netanyahu together have just since March 18th killed 5,401 minimum Gazans, and I put down over 2,000 because the percentages seem to justify that number. But no, I do appreciate your weighing in, Peter B. And it kind of gives me a way to kind of pivot, or not pivot, leverage what you said to a question I really, really want your advice on, or your thoughts. What do we do? I mean, do you see a united front? I saw you posted No Kings pictures on your Facebook page. I went through it to see where your heart is right now, where your actions are. And you were part of the No Kings event, which I think had some real good value to it. Is that what you think is the solution, kind of protesting Trump? Maybe going to some, Stop the Oligarchy tour events with AOC and Bernie? Or do we have to go beyond that? Do we have to reject both political parties and look for some alternative?
Well, these are very difficult questions because, the Democratic Party is so fucking lame. And, with Chuck Schumer as the titular leader right now, because there's nobody, Obama, Biden, they're out of the picture. Kamala never had any credibility on the genocide. And so Schumer is the top-ranking Democrat, and he is so hopelessly in bed with Israel. And he's publicly stated that he sees his job as keeping the Democratic Party aligned with Israel. And so it's not so hard to see that the Democratic Party is not going to lead us to any promised land when it comes to the most critical issues that we're talking about here. And the biggest moral challenge of my lifetime. Vietnam was tough, and some of the intervening wars of choice were hard to take, including Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Libya. But what we're seeing is another misguided regime change operation. But the high voltage third rail that protects it is the use of anti-Semitism to silence anyone who attempts to address it in a rational way. So, to your question, I was in Chicago and I had time on Saturday. My niece was getting married later in the day, and I chose to go and observe and to join the march at the No Kings protest. Um, I applaud Bernie and AOC for their anti-oligarchy tour, and I think that it's very important to point out how our government is now owned lock, stock, and barrel by the wealthiest who are using it, and Musk is just the most odious and obvious, uh, to line their pockets and to further exploit the working class and really anybody under the top 5% in this country, and to wield the levers of government not only for their financial gain, but also to promote, some of the worst ideas that are in circulation today. And so I don't have an easy answer. We've seen repeatedly that even a wealthy guy like Ross Perot could not get on the ballot in enough states to form an effective third-party candidacy for president. We've seen the failure of the Greens to develop a strategy, and I've long argued that they need to win a block of seats in the House of Representatives. If the Greens had 10 seats, particularly with the very narrow majorities that both Democrats and Republicans have used to control the House in recent years, they would have an effective bit of leverage to push for meaningful change. But we haven't seen any strategic approach to challenging the two-party system. And so I don't criticize people who throw up their hands and who say it's a duopoly and, a pox on all of it. But also, I don't see a way to really dismantle the system we have without essentially enabling more extreme right-wing influence and control. And so I'll give you an example. Gavin Newsom, in what I thought was a really misguided political effort, was running a campaign to amend the Constitution to permit reasonable gun regulation. And what his effort is similar to what I think have been cynical efforts by the Democrats to say, oh, we've got to overturn Citizens United. Well, yeah, sure we do. But a constitutional convention in the current climate is not going to advance the interests of liberal, progressive populism. It is going to open the door for evangelicals, the extreme right in this country, the ignorant MAGA factions, to rewrite the Constitution in a way that's even worse than the problems that we have today. So, I wish here I am, retired 5 years, and I have the luxury of uncoupling from the daily news cycle and, trying to personally influence what goes on. but it hasn't given me any better perspective to come up with a way to address these fundamental failures of our system.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of smirking in kind of like hopelessness because you're saying a lot of what I've been feeling. I don't have answers. I'm asking for answers and I don't have them, and I hope to get some. And I think we all are really, really struggling. You mentioned I put Schumer's face. I wanted to play a video for you. I don't know if you saw it, but Schumer was previously baiting Trump to bomb Iran. He was baiting him to calling him chicken, saying he's going to chicken out. So when you see that, I mean, when I see that, then first of all, it justifies for me my vote for Jill Stein in 24. But also, it makes me think we have to support alternatives to this party because even if we're unsuccessful, the current, the current strategy of, I guess, taking over the Democratic Party or reforming the party has just been a complete failure. And those who argue in support of an AOC, you mentioned 10 Greens. Well, there were 10 or enough progressive voices in 2021 to at least hold up Nancy Pelosi's coronation to House Speaker, and at least to use their leverage to demand some real reforms, and they didn't do it. I've heard the argument, well, we got rid of PAYGO. I mean, there were some fiddling on the edges, probably positive, but nothing that the American people would look at and say, oh, that's a win. Progressives really went to the mat for me. I'm going to vote for someone that AOC or that Rashida Tlaib endorses next go round because I see them fighting to get me health care. And just to put the icing on that cake, the House voted unanimously in 23 to make Hakeem Jeffries, who's a complete AIPAC Wall Street stooge, to be their leader. And this is the most important vote you take, more important than any others. Who your leader is, they choose committee assignments. Even if the Dems don't have the majority at that point, it sets Jeffries up to be the House Speaker when they do, and he wields tremendous influence over the caucus. And yet the progressive champions, the Jamie Raskins, they voted for Jeffries. So I can't see this party as on my side, or maybe to put it more fairly, on the side of poor, struggling, working Americans.
Well, and they are so captive to their funding streams. And since you mentioned Pelosi, I have a history with her here in San Francisco. We have been friendly, and I worked for her on one of her campaigns in 1996. And that doesn't stop me from recognizing that she allowed AIPAC to take out every single progressive challenger in House primaries in the last two cycles to prevent the rise of another AOC or, on her best days, and to make sure that the squad, to the extent it was more than just a newspaper or a media shorthand, could develop any serious power. And I can't forgive her for that. The other thing I can't forgive her for is enabling domestic surveillance, but that's a topic for another day.
Well, you did great work covering that. I remember back in the Monterey days when we were operating KRXA 540, you did a tremendous amount of really, really good work exposing the Democratic Congress and also President Obama was doing to oversee America's day-to-day lives in a clearly unconstitutional way.
Yeah, the Fourth Amendment is so clear. There's no fuzzy language in there like the Second Amendment has. Anyway, the sellout of the Democratic Party to the Israel lobby is what brings us to the precipice now. And we are seeing so many recycled themes from 2002, 2003 that led to the lies that took us into Iraq, the so-called weapons of mass destruction claim. And we talked about this earlier, that, just as Saddam didn't have a nuclear weapon, the Ayatollah doesn't have a nuclear weapon. And I believe that Iran increased enrichment as a way to get back to the bargaining table, as a way to try to restore what was Obama's singular, if not only. Well, he reopened Cuba. But the only real accomplishment in foreign policy under Obama was the agreement with Iran. And I give him credit for pursuing that when the hawks would want him to do what he did to Yemen and to so many other places with drones and covert ops. But we now have near unanimity in the Democratic Party. And to see how, there were many sellouts, Feinstein and Schumer and Biden and so many others voted for the AUMF that authorized the invasion of Iraq and led to the long-term occupation, and it was all part of that whole package. We're doing it again.
I think it's worse now. It's scarier now because there's not even any clear end game, and it's we're kind of we're clearly the dog being wagged by the Israeli tail in this case. It does seem more likely that there'll be nuclear weapons at some point, or some type of real. It's hard to say because it's worse because that the war on the people of Iraq was so destabilizing and has caused so much harm and killed so many people, and all of that's forgotten. Nobody, all this makes me so depressed. We've talked about the failures of the Democratic Party and their legion. Let's just pivot if we can to media. I mean, we met through media, through radio. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Can I just make one more reference here that we are seeing the recycled phenomenon of simplistic groupthink, that people imagine that, we just keep hearing about these 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs, and people manage typically to avoid tripping on their tongue when they say that. But the idea that you can blow up Fordo and there won't be nuclear fallout, even though these are not nuclear weapons that we are threatening to use. And then the other side of it is, in this case, we have a known nuclear power with at least 200 nuclear weapons called Israel, and we have no restraint left to try to pressure Netanyahu not to use his nukes. And because he has just, from Gaza to Lebanon to now Iran, we have no idea how far he will take this. And the last thing I'll say is that the idea of regime change in Iran being so easy, and that, there are hordes of people there. I saw one guy on Facebook, a smart guy, claim that 80% of Iranians want a different government. Well, there are certain things that they want, but we have no idea where it goes if you kill the Ayatollah or you topple what we call a regime when we don't like a government. And we deal with all kinds of authoritarian, totalitarian totalitarian governments all over the world and accept them. But Iran is now the regime that must go. And we haven't learned a thing from our previous regime change ops. And I want to take a quick minute here to mention a documentary that is worth seeing. It'll cost you $4.95. It's on Vimeo, and it's called Coup 53. And I know the producer director who is also the host of this documentary. His name is Taghi Amirani. And it is the full story of the coup that took down Mossadegh in 1953 and brought the Shah to power. And the Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, is now going public and basically saying, this ugly Ayatollah's got to go, and I need to be restored. And Hal, I was at a restaurant in Georgetown 20 years ago when Reza and his sister were dining in the next section. Now, that's the only proximity I have to them, but all I can tell you is they were behaving like idiots. And the idea that the Pahlavis should be restored, or that we're going to, pick a new leader for Iran after our successful efforts, as Dick Cheney said, to stand up governments in Iraq and Afghanistan, is just so fundamentally ludicrous. But that's where we're headed. And it's really tragic to say that and to see it.
Well, let's talk. One thing that you're saying, and 100% I agree with what you've said, that I find so disappointing, so sad, and I'll put this headline up, although this is a little bit elusive, but as an allusive, not elusive, but it's probably elusive as well. But folks that I think, who lived through the Vietnam War, shall we say, or at least were children, then remember it. And what a terrible disaster it was for, first and foremost, the people of Southeast Asia, how many lives were lost, how the economies were destroyed, people's, the wake of the backwash of war was genocide in Cambodia. People who lived through that and who were perhaps in the streets even protesting against the war now are defending our involvement in Ukraine, are making excuses. Maybe you support the military proxy war. I see it as against Russia, but to me, this is just another military adventure on another side of the world that to the extent that we have, that we're relevant, we helped provoke it, and we did what we could to not stop it. They come up with excuses why it's okay for us, why we should continue to support Israel, continue to provide Israel with the weapons of mass destruction, and also, as you point out, come up with justifications for what Israel's doing in Iran, and even perhaps for our getting involved. And yet people who should know better, who lived through terrible American adventures that ended so badly, they seem to have not learned from it. And I can't blame corruption, right? You can blame Chuck Schumer's corruption on all the contributions he gets from military contractors, the support they give his party. I mean, it's pretty easy to understand why he would take the positions he does. But it seems to me a lot of rank and file voters have simply failed to understand what's couldn't be clearer to me, and I presume to you as well.
Well, let me just briefly respond to a couple of things there. First of all, Joe Biden and Tony Blinken did a whole lot of damage. Their foreign policy was reckless and just terrible. I fundamentally agree with you that we used Ukraine in a proxy war against Russia. We need to go back before 2014 and the annexation of Crimea to look at the U.S. interference in Ukraine. where we took out Yanukovych, who was corrupt but had been elected, and we had no fundamental right or reason to do that. At this stage, I'm very sympathetic to the people of Ukraine. Russia, I prefer not to personalize it to their leader. Russia has been brutal to Ukraine and the innocent public, the destruction of infrastructure. Trump has made it even worse by trying to dictate the terms of surrender to Ukraine before there's even been any kind of a meaningful negotiation. So it's a mixed bag of the Biden era blunders compounded with Trump's hubris and his claim that he could snap his fingers and that Putin would just give him an end
would fall
to this.
in line. Also, Trump using it to try to leverage, access to Ukrainian natural resources. I mean, again, you can't make this stuff up. Just the incredible greed, the cupidity. And Trump did say some good things. He said, "Hey, I want people not to die," and to his credit, it appears, sincerely tried to push the parties to negotiate in good faith. But you're right. I mean, he's very, very compromised.
Faith negotiation when you tell Ukraine that they've got to give a list of 9 items and Russia just needs to withdraw. So,
right.
His idea of a deal is just so bizarre. But you put up the headline from the Times about the New York mayor's race. And I wanted to say that I'm not an expert on all of the details there, but clearly the editorial they wrote was just such bullshit. And, they tried to lead their readers into rejecting a dangerous socialist Democrat who has a lot of good ideas, who's built a lot of momentum, who's engaged people in a race that was, simply written off as Cuomo's return. And I've never liked Andrew Cuomo, and I don't support his political resuscitation in this race. But to attack Mondami the way they did is so similar to what we've seen over the last few cycles here in San Francisco. And the San Francisco Chronicle is not as influential, particularly on a national basis, as the New York Times. But they were influential, and you put up the headline here. London Breed was a total failure. She was a product of the identity politics that we discussed at the outset of the show. She was mentored by Willie Brown, and she basically presided over the 27th year of the Willie Brown administration, because Willie handed it off to Gavin Newsom, who left early to become lieutenant governor, and he handed it off to a guy named Ed Lee, who was a bureaucrat who said he'd only serve out Gavin's term, and then he ran for a full term. Then he died in office. Then London Breed was next in line and took over. And so over that period of time, the Chronicle worked very hard in league with tech millionaires and billionaires to prevent the rise of a progressive messiah. And that language comes from J. Edgar Hoover and back to his effort to prevent the rise of a black messiah after he took care of Martin Luther King Jr. So the guy who I wanted to be mayor of San Francisco is a gay progressive named Mark Leno. Very successful, rose through the ranks to the state assembly, state senate, passed a lot of great legislation, and would have been a great mayor. But we have these powerful brokers and wealthy individuals who worked with the Chronicle to make it appear that progressives would just destroy San Francisco. And that's the same bullshit that the Times is using to say that if transit in New York was free, that this would be some sort of dangerous socialist experiment that cannot be even contemplated. And, you know, here in San Francisco, Muni and BART are the two big transit systems, and they are so underwater that they're going to either have to become fully public financed, or they're going to go under in the next 3 to 5 years. And I see a benefit to maintaining them, and I don't want to privatize them. And I think it is a public obligation to find a way to fund them. And so to have this come up in this race, and now they're trying to spear Mondami. The latest attack is that he, used the phrase, or at least rationalized the phrase, global intifada. And so he's being called anti-Semitic. We're back at this, trope that has become so widespread and effective. And by the way, I can call out actual anti-Semitism. There's a case in San Francisco last weekend where 2 young Jewish women were beaten up by a guy who attacked them for being Jews. The Tree of Life is a case of deadly anti-Semitism that we all have been told to forget was caused by a Trumper who was attacking members of the congregation because they supported immigrants. And so, again, I'm not an expert on New York, but I read this editorial. I found it really insulting and offensive. And they dispatched Eric Adams in 1 or 2 lines in this editorial, and he was their great moderate hope just 4 years ago.
Yeah, and let me just jump in, because what the Times
Sure.
did is exactly what the Chronicle does, or did in this editorial, is they wring their hands and lament all the terrible problems in the city. And a lot of those problems are real. I mean, San Francisco's homeless problem is just so, at least the last time I was there, it's been a few years now, maybe they say in the Chronicle it's gotten a little better, I don't know. But I understand the crime problem is serious, the trash problem is terrible. So these are real problems. The affordability crisis, which is what Bill de Blasio says is the biggest problem facing New York City, and I believe him, I think he's right. Those crises that the Times and the Chronicle lament and say we need a mayor who's going to fix them, they were all created by the candidates that the Times and the Chronicle backed to be mayor, by who pursued the exact policies that the Times and the Chronicle are saying that we need to continue to pursue, that caused the problem, and we can't go in a different direction that would, hopefully, likely address at least the most serious pathologies that have resulted. $6,000. I mentioned this. My sister's, relatively modest. I mean, I don't know if she's watching. I don't want to insult her. It's nice. I like it. It's in a good location, but it's not a luxury apartment. We're not about a Park Avenue duplex. It's a 2-bedroom plus apartment. It's over $6,000 a month. I mean, do the math. It's $75,000 a year. In New York City, and I'm sure San Francisco is the same. New York City is simply unaffordable for all, really, but the corporate lawyer, investment banker class. At least Manhattan is, and Brooklyn Heights for sure. and Riverdale in the Bronx, if you know the city. I mean, if you go further out in Queens and Brooklyn towards Coney Island, it gets a lot less expensive. But there's a lot of cost living there. You have to take long subway travel, which isn't cheap necessarily, and there are other factors involved as well. So the city is clearly unaffordable, and it's because of the exact politicians that the New York Times now is calling for people to vote for.
And just a quick point, you're correct. San Francisco continues to have a serious homeless problem. Under a Supreme Court ruling, they've been able to move people off the streets, and they're just hiding them. And, you know, the misery hasn't really shifted. But one of the things I want to call out the Chronicle for is that they frequently publish stories about the fentanyl crisis and the death toll from fentanyl. And it's a real problem. But the picture they paint is that the vast majority of fentanyl users and those who die from overdoses are street people. And they only occasionally will publish the facts from the coroner that show that about 25% of the deaths from fentanyl in San Francisco over the last 5 years have been people living without shelter, the homeless, which means that 3/4 are people who work, who have a home, who have some means. And that's just completely left out. And we're not doing anything to address the vast majority of people who are using and dying as a result of fentanyl.
Well, it was very profitable. It's a very profitable drug, I suppose, for certain powerful entities. I mean, it's however you look at it, it's just a failure of government, and neither party seems. This is the Democratic Party. That's why I will not shame voters who vote Republican. I won't do it.
No, I agree. I don't shame people however they vote. You seem to a while back need to explain that you voted against Kamala Harris, that you voted for Jill Stein. When Kamala went on The View and said she wouldn't do anything different from Joe Biden, she lost the race. And, you know, even to have some sort of a subtle indication of, hey, I'm going to review our relationship with all people who, under the Leahy law, use or receive American weapons. And if there are any claims of genocide, we will cut off those arms shipments. That's all she had to say. But she wouldn't allow any daylight between her and Biden, and I believe that's what really caused her to lose.
Yeah, absolutely.
She lost because people didn't vote, not because they voted for Trump.
I would, as bad as I always thought of Harris, and I have, you know, I saw her in close up back when I was living in Monterey, and I thought she was terrible. I thought she was a terrible attorney general. She refused point blank to comply with lawful federal district court orders to reduce prison overpopulation. That was one, you know, just a terrible thing that she did. And the list goes on, but that's just an example of something that was particularly irritating and upsetting to me when she was attorney general. She never impressed me as a speaker or by her intellect or anything. But I would have voted for Peter B. And as much as I'm really a Dem abandoned, I would have, because I do consider Trump to be that bad that I would even vote for Harris. But I needed something. I needed her to throw me a bone, at least to say, yes, what Israel is doing is horrible. Even to say that probably wouldn't have been enough. She would have had to say, yes, I will hold up arms shipments. But she couldn't even condemn Israel. Whenever Israel's atrocities were brought up, she immediately, the first thing, let's look, you know, this started on October 7 when Hamas killed 1,200. You know, it was always the Palestinians' fault. It was always Palestine. Hamas's fault. I just couldn't vote for that. Does that mean, are you considering voting for a Green? Would you consider, what do you think of that? Butch Ware, Stein's running mate, now in the race for governor in your state next year, perhaps against Kamala Harris.
I will consider it. I really haven't read anything about Butch, and I don't know what his campaign looks like. But I certainly hope that Kamala doesn't run for governor. She has the name ID, but she would run another furtive campaign where she will not take any significant positions, and you have no idea what you will get. And how, beyond what you pointed out, when it goes back to when she was district attorney in San Francisco, and there was a young man named Jamal Truelove who was tried for murder by her office, and Kamala grandstanded at the verdict, and at the sentencing she would show up. And he was later retried and found to be innocent, and collected a $14 million settlement from San Francisco. She has never apologized. She's never acknowledged the wrongdoing in that case. And later, as Attorney General, she got a lot of attention. Remember when Obama talked about how good looking she was and how she had fought, and she did get bigger money damages for the people who were foreclosed on illegally after the 2008 meltdown. But her staff came to her and said that a guy named Steve Mnuchin should be indicted for fraud in the massive foreclosures that a company he ran. It had been called IndyMac, and I don't remember what they changed the name to, but Mnuchin had written her a check for a couple of $1,000s for her attorney general campaign, but beyond that, we have no idea why she decided to protect him. But her staff was unanimous that he should be indicted and held responsible for the fraud, and she refused to do it. And, people know he wound up as the Treasury Secretary in Trump 1.0. And she just has so many checkers in a checkered past. And one of the reasons that I was initially drawn to Tulsi Gabbard when she ran for president in 2020 was the way that she took down Kamala in one 60-second answer in one of the debates that nobody watched because there were so many people on the stage. But she just decimated Harris's record as Attorney General and called her a phony progressive. And that was the beginning of what caused Kamala to exit the race before she stood for any of the primaries. So since then, Gabbard has become a Trump collaborator. And other than telling the truth about Iran and its nuclear weapons, I don't have anything good to say about her new role in the Trump government.
Well, I'm not happy with the turn that Tulsi Gabbard's career has taken either. And I will say in 2020, there was a moment where I considered her to be the best choice among the Democratic primary candidates, ahead of even Bernie, because of her youth mainly. But I also just felt she was, perhaps it was, and I don't remember the exact reason, but maybe it was the way she spoke against Harris. I thought she was a very strong candidate at that point, very honest. She was extremely strong pro-peace voice. I think that was the main reason, Peter B.
Yeah,
that
she
I
was
preferred
against
her.
the regime. She was very clear that she opposed regime change wars. And
Yeah.
I embraced that. I have one of my podcast listeners from Hawaii sent me a Tulsi for President t-shirt, and I can't wear it.
Yeah, no, she was a pretty interesting person, a pretty interesting candidate. And I think that stood out for a moment anyway as the best candidate. There were some issues when she kind of pulled back on Medicare for all that took a lot of the steam or a lot of the wind out of the sails of her vote for me. But, you know, we can go back and look at it. But I will say this, where I think maybe you and I disagree a little bit. Um, I I give her a little tiny bit of slack for becoming a Trumper. And the reason I say that is because the Democratic Party so pilloried her for her support of Bernie in 2016. And she was just an absolute laughingstock on the left. She was a punchline of jokes. The way she was treated, for example, by the ladies on The View. And she always held her own. I mean, she was always outpointed or flat out knocked out her detractors. But it had to be wearying. I mean, she had been a loyal Democrat, and she supported the best Democrat she thought, and she was right. And she was, rewarded by basically becoming a pariah in the party. And I can understand why she, just said, I will not play with these people anymore.
I also defended her when she was attacked for having gone to talk to Bashar al-Assad in Syria. I don't think that was traitorous or evil. I think that it was an honest attempt to look for an end to the carnage there that she knew was at least in part driven by American covert operations. And so, and people, I took a lot of crap from people for defending her in that respect. But I'll join my old friend, the ex-CIA Russia expert Ray McGovern, and say that she should resign because Trump has rejected and just out of hand said, I don't care what she says. Iran, is trying to develop a nuclear weapon, and that can't stand. That's an Israeli propaganda point that has, as we said, it's become the new claim of WMD in Iraq.
We've gone well over an hour. I do want to end the program where you to kind of move from the ridiculous or sinister to the sublime. A lot of people know that you're a disc jockey, that your career began in radio music, playing records, and these, I believe, from what you told me, were two of your faves back in the 60s. And I'm going to say pop music because I don't really think rock is the right genre exactly for either one. I guess funk would be Sly, right? He's sort of the progenitor of that, and Wilson, surf music, not even surf rock. So you wanted to talk a little bit about these two luminaries.
Yeah, Sly Stone made a big impact on me, and it was his fusion of punk and rock. I'm sorry, funk, rock, and pop that really grabbed me with pretty strong messages for the day. Everyday People, many of the other songs really, I think, were just seminal at that point in time. And the story I have to share is that I was a union activist, and when I worked in the radio business, and I annoyed management everywhere I went by being the shop steward or the board member of my station's unit. And so as a result, I served for many years on the local board of San Francisco AFTRA, the American Federation of TV and Radio Artists, that later merged with SAG, and that's SAG-AFTRA today. So I would go to these monthly meetings, and they would circulate a few different things. One was about new members, and one was about payments for members that had not been collected. And every month for over 10 years, Sly Stone was on that list. And there was a check being held at the office, and they couldn't find an address for him. And they tried to track him down through the record label, through his agent, through other musicians and friends. And the check may have been for $10. It may have been for $50,000. I was not made privy to that. But it always amused me every month that I'd get this document passed around at the meeting that once again, we can't find Sly Stone. And I never got to meet him. I did have tickets to a concert in Chicago, which was one of the many that he didn't show up for. And after that, I gave up trying to see him perform live because he had developed an unfortunate reputation for being unreliable. Now, Brian Wilson was really part of that surf rock wave of the early 60s. And I was exposed to it by my oldest brother, who's 5 years older than me, who owned every Beach Boys album and bought all the singles when they came out. And I loved the sound, I loved the harmonies. And Brian, as we know, was a very talented songwriter. And whether it was drugs or mental illness, he did suffer over the years and was famously in a conservatorship with some doctor. I can't think of the guy's name, but a guy who seemed pretty quacky, who had control over Brian's meds and his life. So in 1994, I was co-founder of an event called the Music Journalism Awards, and we staged a conference for music writers from all over the country, and we had artists who reviewed the work of journalists which was submitted, and they chose the best music journalism reporting of the previous year. And we held awards, and it was interesting, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a niche between, say, the Grammys and maybe the Screenwriters Award, or not quite a Pulitzer. I don't want to aggrandize it, but the idea was to honor the people who wrote about contemporary music. So for our first event, which was in West Hollywood, we secured Brian as a performer. And there were all kinds of behind-the-scenes negotiations, and we were given ground rules. It didn't involve a rider like no brown M&Ms, but Brian insisted on entering the building through the loading dock. I was not permitted to talk to him, but I did escort him from the loading dock upstairs to the ballroom where he performed. And he did appear to be a little disoriented. But when he sat down at the piano and put his hands on the keys, he became Brian Wilson, the genius, the guy who wrote those incredible songs. And Pet Sounds encompasses so much of the great music that he created. And he performed 4 or 5 songs. He would not look at the audience. He sang but did not speak. And as soon as it was over, Dr. Landy, that's what his name was, Dr. Landy came and took him by the arm and escorted him out. So that was my brief encounter with Brian Wilson. And just since these 2 men have passed, I spent time listening to their music again. And I encourage people to revisit their catalogs because there's just so much tremendous work there.
Yeah, I'm going to go listen to Everyday People now that you mentioned it as soon as, because I love that's a great song. And I also did always love the Beach Boys. They're tremendous. Just one comment for your response, and then I guess we'll let it go for the day. But, Brian Wilson considered the main driving force behind the great music. And of course, he's gone now, and he lived a lot. He outlived what I think a lot of people thought he would live, because he had so many problems with the drugs. He was overweight. I think there were other issues as well, depression for sure. Mike Love, still going, still doing concerts, a guy that I think a lot of people in the music world, as I understand it, don't have love for, don't feel much affection for, and may not view as having nearly the amount of talent that his cousin Brian Wilson had. You think there's something there that the genius sometimes can kind of take over, and you lose, grounding, and you just can't continue life, the way other quote normal unquote people can?
Um, I don't know about that, Hal, because I'm not a genius, and so I'm not sure. It is a burden to be a genius, and it can put you at odds with people who are jealous of that. But when I look at the Beach Boys and I look at the Jackson Five, I think of the incredible pressure they faced from their fathers. And both, Mr. Wilson, I don't remember his name, was it Frank, maybe?
Murray.
Murray? Okay, thank you. And the Jackson's father, they were relentless in the way they treated their kids and drove them to perform, to excel. And if I had to, play psychiatrist or psychologist here, I would think that those were the factors that caused the aberrations of these very talented people.
Well, Peter B., thank you so much. Any final word, final thought about anything we discussed, or maybe something you were hoping to discuss, hoping we would get to and we didn't?
No, I think this has been a great conversation, Hal. Wow. I just noticed how long we've been talking. It went by very fast, and I thought we covered a lot of important things for the world we live in today. And, we will just have to continue to watch and see where things go.
Yeah, I wish things were a little better. I think it's hard for a lot of folks right now, and probably less challenging for, I don't know, I assume your life is going pretty well. A lot of people, sadly, they're really struggling in our society, in our world, and I don't see them with friends, allies in government or in high places, and it's very, very upsetting.
Yeah.
That'll do it. I'll be back tomorrow for the free for all. We thank Peter B. so much for being part of today's Halitics. Enjoy the rest of your day.